Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lessons Learned, the dumbest thing I've ever done with money. My name is Suzanne, and I am the owner of G.R.A.C.E Financial Coaching, and I have Morin with me today. Caroline is a health coach. She helps people who are really good at taking care of others, but who are not so good at taking care of themselves. Does that sound familiar, anyone? Caroline helps those people to learn to prioritize their nutrition, their exercise, their sleep, and their ways of managing stress. As we know in our society, we have, the sandwich generation. We've got people who have kids in college, and then we have those same people are taking care of elderly parents. And so this is so important. And Caroline is an expert in that area. So Caroline, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So today, Caroline, tell us first about your practice and kind of what you do as a coach for these particular groups of people.
Well, I think I have the best job because I get to help people shift their approach to nutrition and exercise, which is something that there's just a lot of confusion about, a lot of overinformation out there right now, and just help people get to shift their approach to that and learn how to prioritize their own well-being, right? So that they can make those lasting lifestyle changes, kind of get off that diet hamster wheel, right? So that they can live healthier, have more energy, and yes, lose weight, because that is sort of what everybody is looking for these days, right? But it's really just a byproduct of a healthier lifestyle, of prioritizing those things, eating well, sleeping well, moving in ways that are working for our bodies, and really learning to manage our stress in healthier ways.
And it really rings true with the people who are taking care of someone else right now, because not just adult children who are taking care of elderly parents. I know adult children who are taking care of their grandkids because childcare is so expensive these days. And so in order to keep up with, I'm thinking of someone in particular, hopefully she's listening, but in order to keep up with her two grandkids, she has gone back to the gym. And I said, when was the last time you went to the gym? She's like 30 years ago, but to keep up with a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, you've got to have a certain level of stamina. You have to be able to move. You're going to bend over and pick up those babies how many times a day? If you don't have a good core, if you're carrying a few extra pounds, that's going to hurt your back. Right. And that's just the easiest example I can think of.
Yeah. And what better idea to be proactive about that, so that when those things we might not be expecting right now to be taking care of grandkids in a couple of years, but we very well may be, and are going to want to have the best experience with that, right? Be able to give it our best. And so being proactive about how we're taking care of ourselves becomes that much more important.
I'm going to ask you this. I wasn't planning on asking you this, but I heard 2 or 3 commercials. One of them must have been on social media about walking and how walking is making. One was on a podcast, one was on like a Facebook commercial, and then one was somebody was physically talking to me about it in person, and how walking is making a comeback. And I remember my mom and her friends in the neighborhood would all go for a walk after dinner, and it was like that was what you did in the early 90s. Have you seen this walking trend come back recently?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's so great. I think I also had this sort of mindset of walking is for moms or for people who are too old to run, or who, because it's not as physically challenging. Maybe it doesn't get our heart rate up as much. It's not as much impact on our bodies. And I, like maybe many people in my generation, kind of grew up in that time of aerobic activity and
exercise,
step class and all of that, which I think is also making a comeback. But this idea of working out more, work out more and eat less was kind of our mantra. And as it turns out, that's really not always the case. I mean, we know we need that that steady state cardiovascular work. It works differently on our bodies. And so that's a big mindset shift for a lot of my clients who are, into heavy CrossFit, heavy HIIT workouts, really high intensity stuff that is really an added stress on our bodies where we're already having a lot of, emotional, social, mental stressors like from work and our daily lives on us, that like adding that more gentle exercise in terms of walking is a great way to do that. And walking after dinner is such a great, easy entry point to creating healthier habits. It helps to balance our blood sugar after a meal. So
yes, I did. I think it was on the podcast that they mentioned that as well too. And the, the podcast host was like, people don't know this. And the person they were interviewing was like, no, people don't know this. Like, and so we've got to get that message back out there that, yeah, it may have been a little bit of a gossip club in the early 90s when people were doing it, but it actually was helping those women. And I do remember the husbands, once the kids got of an age where the kids could be in the house alone for 45 minutes, right? They weren't going on a hike. Some of the husbands would join them too. And so, it was helping them in ways that they didn't realize it was helping them. It was probably more of a, get me out of the house, let me be able to talk to other adults at the time, when you're raising little kids. But then all of a sudden, so for the social aspects, but the health aspects, I was like, what are the chances of me hearing about walking 3 times in one day? I mean, I must have missed the memo. So
yes, I did a Facebook walking challenge last month, and it was a hit. People are really looking for that. And it's about community too.
Yes.
Sure. And if you go to, if you've spent time in Europe, a lot of cultures, they go for a walk, go down to the square and dance and have some social interaction and some movement after dinner. It's just kind of ingrained in that. And we've lost that here.
Yeah, definitely. Last thing on the walking, there was an article, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal this summer. It was Wall Street Journal and New York Times that said Americans are eating a lot in Europe, but still losing weight after their vacation. Why? And literally basically the thesis of the article was like, you don't realize how much other cultures walk. And so, even where my brother lives in Brooklyn, they'll walk to the grocery store every day. Yeah. They don't have a giant closet to keep Costco-sized toilet paper in, so it's like they're going every day and kind of picking up what they need for dinner, which also is another European type tradition where you leave the office, you walk to the local market. A lot of these aren't even name brand places. They're mom and pop places still, and you're picking up what you need for dinner that night. And so just integrating that. Gosh, I mean, some of these people walk 10 minutes. Who cares? But you're doing it every day, multiple times.
Right. And so getting up a few times every day to take a quick walk around the block, if you're somebody who's working from home or working at a desk in an office somewhere, getting up and taking a walk up and down the halls or outside for just 10 minutes helps improve our blood pressure when we're sitting throughout the day. So these are like exercise snacks. That's kind of a word that's going around too. You can do some like walking snacks, just take 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And it all adds up to make a big difference.
Awesome. Good. All right. Well, I'm glad I'm the last person on the walking bandwagon, but
never too late. Come and join us.
Right. Exactly. Awesome. Well, Caroline, obviously the crux of this show is that I ask people what's the dumbest thing they've ever done with money. So what would you say is your biggest financial blunder?
Well, the dumbest thing I ever did with money was to not pay attention. To really just bury my head in the sand when a problem came up. So it's kind of heavy, but it's a story that anybody who knows me personally knows about, but I've never really spoken publicly about it. So it's kind of feels like maybe it's a little bit healing for me to talk about it. And hopefully it'll be a little bit healing maybe for some of your listeners as well, because I'm sure that I'm not the only one who's been there, right? So this will kind of date me, but it kind of goes back to I was a young mom, a stay-at-home mom. I had 3 small children, and this is back in the time when Oprah Winfrey had her show on at like 3 or 4 o'clock every afternoon. I can't remember, but it was very like much a ritual. I'd be like folding laundry, watching Oprah, right? The kids are napping, and there was this woman on the show who was explaining her financial picture. It was called like financial disaster, like some like really dramatic title, right? And so she's explaining how she like had a credit card to do all the grocery shopping and shopping at Target, right? But she never really saw the bills. Her husband had everything sent to the office, and she didn't really have to worry about anything. Her life was, you know, pretty good. And she had this really easygoing kind of lifestyle, staying home with the kids, but somehow she just had this kind of like nagging sense that something wasn't quite right, right?
Hmm.
And she did a little digging and found out that they were in some incredibly significant financial debt. And when she said that, I just sort of remember like dropping the laundry and saying, "Oh my God, that's me. That's my life." I had no idea what was going on with our finances. My husband had everything sent to the office. Like, I'm taking care of everything. I got it. And I was just totally oblivious. But I just had that gut feeling, you know, sometimes when you just like know that something is. So, you know, I know that I had this like saying ingrained in my mind: ignorance is no excuse for the law. I think it was something my mom told me when I was like learning how to drive or something, like way back when. And I stood there in like freeze mode probably for a couple of weeks, like in indecision, right? Like, I don't want to know the picture. I don't want to know. I want to know because I think that this is something big, but I don't want to know because I knew it was going to completely upend my life, right? And upend the life that I imagined my future to be, right? And ultimately, I knew I didn't even really need to see the bank statements because I knew what the picture was, right? The writing on the wall. So, like, very long story short, like, we unraveled the mess, right? And it was the hardest thing I ever went through, and it took years to really fully unravel, right? There was like bankruptcy, there were liens on a paycheck, for unpaid taxes, which I didn't even realize that we hadn't been filing taxes. I mean, it was really insane. I was living in a pretty affluent neighborhood, driving a brand new SUV and standing at the gas station trying to decide, put gas in the car so I can take the kids to school, buy groceries, or pay the electric bill. And it was someplace I never had imagined myself to be. And it was a really, really horrible feeling. But don't worry, it has a happy ending.
Well, so to stop you there for a second, what would you say, you know, money was like for you growing up prior to your marriage?
Right. That's a good question. My parents prioritize education above all else, which I am eternally grateful for. They put all of their money into sending all three of their children, my siblings and I, to the best schools that they could find growing up in Baltimore. And things were really, really tight for me. I was definitely always in a state of, like perceived lack, like for me, like growing up.
Yeah, we're talking like private schools in that area.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not even in the public school system. We're talking about education from a very young age, you know, privately. So yeah, right off the bat, everybody knows how expensive that is, you know?
Yeah. So I was always, you know, the kid who like, we were like scrimping and saving. I didn't get to like have the extras, like, you know, kind of constant, probably, like trying to keep up with everybody else.
Oh yeah, trying to keep up with what jeans everyone's wearing. And I was the same way. And I think the only reason I got a new clothes, to be honest with you, was because I was the oldest of like my generation of cousins, as well as the oldest of my siblings. And the next closest female cousin to me, we were not even like remotely the same shape or size. And so like, right, my brother and then my brother being the oldest boy, you know, I watched all of his clothes go from him to our next male cousin like 9 years later. Like, I'm not talking about like 9 months later, like years later. And then even some of the youngest boys who are in college today, I remember seeing them in some of my brother's, you know, old stuff that had held up. So I think that's the only reason I didn't have hand-me-downs in my family, because I happen to be the oldest. But yes, I distinctly remember like wanting the name brand jeans that everyone was wearing, wanting the name brand sneakers that everyone was wearing. And we didn't have that either.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think that definitely ingrains something, this like money mindset in our lives. I grew up with my mom saying things like, she really tried to like make the best picture for us, right? And really live like an honorable life of like, these are our financial choices to send you to private school because it's important to us. And for that reason, like we don't have a lot of extra money, but we're happy this way, right? Like this is the best way. This is the way we're choosing to live. And she would say things like, it's easier for a rich man to get through the eye of it all, right? Than for a rich man to get into heaven, like those kinds of things, like poor is happy, and kind of those things. But it was very incongruent to kind of what I was seeing, because she was challenged. That was challenging for her too, right?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, thinking about not having your kids' friends have all those things and not being able to give that to your children. That was definitely hard for her too, I'm sure.
Right. And we repeat these patterns. Right. Right. Very much so.
I'm sure you see that with food and people's relationship with food and nutrition and stuff like that. Once this is built into us, this is a big reason why companies market. So when they're marketing, like a big one is Tide laundry detergent. When you interview people and ask why they're using Tide, 99% of the time, the answer is because their parents used it.
Oh my gosh, I haven't heard that, and that makes so much sense.
Yep. Clinique is one for me. I will literally use 90% of Clinique makeup because I grew up with the little green boxes in my mom's makeup drawer. There's 8 million brands of makeup now. When I was growing up, there was like 5, but like there's 8 million brands of makeup now. But I won't even go into a Sephora because I'm like, what do I need to go to Sephora for? Like Clinique's fine. You know what I mean? But that's what my mom used. And so just in that same sense, they've done studies with, and just because we're, when we're recording this, we're coming up on the fall. They've done studies on what kind of Halloween candy people purchase. And it's literally because that's what they remember their parents giving out.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. I never even equated that.
Like I will buy Snickers because my mother loved Snickers. Like it's crazy. So just in that same sense that we hang on to these products, we hang on to our money mindset and we hang on to our health mindset that we grew up with. So how do you think that mindset helped or hurt you once you got to this basically when you discovered you guys were in financial trouble?
That's a good question. I think the mindset that helped me was understanding that that I could make a change, that I didn't have to stay stuck in that. And I think that understanding that I could make a change and kind of break that cycle and pass some more financial responsibility onto my children was a huge motivator for me at any rate.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, how old were the kids at this point? They had no concept of this.
Like 1, 3, and 5.
Right. So they have no idea of anything that's going on. They have they wouldn't have been able to notice anything anyway.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So they grew up though, like kind of in like me unraveling all of this and like kind of, having to come to terms with like dealing with taking personal responsibility for my finances for the first time really in my life, because also we grew up in a time where we didn't learn about money except to like balance your checkbook, right? That was like really the only kind of financial education I had, which I think like that balancing your checkbook in hindsight, like the month after you've already spent your money, right, is not the most helpful.
Yeah, I think the only good thing about the balancing of the checkbook was that, and again, we don't do this anymore because we don't need to do it anymore. But if you were paying with a check at the grocery store, I distinctly, and I wish I had my checkbook sitting here, but I distinctly remember my mother like opening it and like, could you imagine someone doing this in line today? If you've gotten behind an 85-year-old woman who is still using checks at Food Lion, but that's our like main grocery store down here, guys. Like, you're like, what are you doing, lady? And I remember my mother doing the math right there. Right there. And so the only good thing the checkbook balancing did was it made people understand what they physically had in real time. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people will argue with me and they'll say, well, that's what online banking does. A lot of that stuff is pending. And going into like a holiday weekend, for example, if you go out to dinner Friday night, if your bank is completely closed on Saturday and their computers are not processing transactions, then you've got all your expenses Saturday, all your expenses Sunday, and all your expenses on a holiday Monday. Stuff doesn't clear. It'll show as pending, but it doesn't clear until Tuesday because the banks aren't paying for their machines to process those transactions over the weekend. That's why it shows as pending when you go into online banking. Whereas my mom at the grocery store line could see, oh, okay, like we're going, as soon as this check clears, whether it clears tomorrow or it clears in 6 days, we're going to be down to $600 in the checking account or $500, whatever it is, right? That's the only good part about checkbook balancing. And do you remember what class you learned that in?
I took a math class in college, my freshman year of college, and it was like a math, I don't know, it was like essentials or something.
Do you want to know what class most people took that in? What class most people heard of checkbook balancing in?
What
Home
class?
ec.
Oh yeah.
Home ec, which has gone the way of shop
Right.
and technology. It's gone. There is no home ec anymore, guys. Like, so if the majority of, I can't believe you had that in a math class. That's the first time I've heard that in years. If the majority of what we were learning, that little piece is gone with home ec, or now, you know, the little piece of math class you had, now we have nothing.
Well,
Absolutely
and
zero.
also something in like writing that down, like writing down that payment and like making that a more concrete piece of
it feels like an actual transaction. It feels like you're losing the money at that stage.
Yeah.
Some people feel like that with cash. I don't. But a lot of my clients will take out what they're going to use for groceries for the 1st half of the month and put it in an envelope, and then they physically feel the emotional loss when they go to pay at the grocery store. I don't know if it's because I'm like an old millennial. I don't know. Cash, like if it's in my wallet, it's gone. It needs to be, if someone hands me $200 in cash or something, like I need to go put it in the bank so that I can track it. Okay, so-and-so gave me $200 for XYZ for splitting an Airbnb next month, you know, and then that money goes to that next month. But if I have cash in my wallet, it's gone. So everybody's different. But to your point, writing down the physical dollar amount and holding up the line behind you.
Right.
That was, you know, it was not an exercise in futility. It was ingraining in you what was left in your checking account now.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point too, like knowing what works for you and how you handle cash, right? And for my clients, it's like knowing what works for me and how I handle, you know, having Girl Scout cookies in the house, or how I handle going out to dinner, or how I handle my plans for grocery shopping, right? So figuring out what works for you, because it's not a one size fits all approach for all of us.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And it's even more, it's just such a parallel with health coaching and nutrition coaching and financial coaching, because, you know, everybody's different. You know, everybody's how they grew up with money is different, and how their body processes food is different. So it's a great parallel, definitely. So tell us the happy ending, if you can.
Okay. I think, well, you know, happy ending was that I realized that I could change, that I didn't need to stay stuck, and that taking action and taking personal responsibility for that, it would have been really easy for me to blame my husband for all of that, because I mean, it just really would have been easy to do that. And my taking responsibility for not having the information, for arming myself with the information and figuring out what next steps to take was super empowering. And, you know, we're since divorced, very amicably divorced, and am remarried and have been able to create my own financial stability for myself and for my children, and really pass on that knowledge to my children through that story, through understanding like what I went through. But I can really say with authority that they understand the value of money and the freedom that comes with having responsibility for their own personal money in ways that just far surpass what I see most kids their age out there
Yeah,
experiencing.
definitely. How old are the 5, 3, and 1-year-old now?
They are 21, 19, and 17. And
Oh,
our
yeah.
17-year-old, I mean, they've all worked and had jobs since they were 14 and learned the power of spending and saving. And our 17-year-old has saved enough money to take a couple of months to backpack across Europe. He's leaving in a couple of weeks. By the time this airs, hopefully he'll be headed home. And to learn how to budget for that trip, and he gets to stay as long until his money runs out. And so, really figuring out what he wants to do, and he's learned that that some of the sacrifices he's had to make through high school are like giving him this freedom that he has now. And many other kids his age aren't really getting to experience that level of
That's
freedom. So,
incredible. Oh my gosh. That is such a happy ending. Yeah. I think there's a huge portion of this that we may have just glossed over a little too quickly is not because I work with a lot of couples, obviously, not assigning blame to the person who really maybe was like 75% responsible, because that person could have brought it up sooner. And I'll be honest with you. A lot of times when I work with a couple, it's the wife. And it's like, hey, honey, I know when we got married, I went onto your Amex account. I maxed that thing out 2 years ago. You know what I mean? And so like a lot of times there's like financial and emotional like instability there, where it's like a little bit of a coming to Jesus. But can we blame one person for not bringing it up sooner? Sure, we could, but what's that going to do? And I think that's a huge lesson that you're bringing today, because it's not worth it. It's not saying, hey, it's 75% his fault, it's only 25% my fault. It's not worth it.
And honestly, I mean, even if it was so much more empowering for me to take 50% of that responsibility, take 100% of that responsibility. He takes 100% of the responsibility, and I take 100% of the responsibility for what that was. And that has served me more than anything.
Oh, absolutely. Totally. Oh my gosh, Caroline, I love this story. There's so many people out there like this, where they've had a financial issue in their relationship that they've had to overcome. And sometimes they don't overcome it. But I definitely, it's obvious that you have. And the fact that your son is backpacking through Europe with cash in the bank is absolutely just incredible, and a real testament to what you taught them after going through this.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And it's an ongoing learning experience.
Yes, absolutely. That's another thing. People I've coached 3 years ago will call me and be like, hey, we're going through XYZ. And, that's just not something that came up during our coaching program. And so there's always going to be different stuff happening, and we're always going to learn from it. Absolutely. Well, you guys can reach out to Caroline. All of her information is going to be in the show notes. And Caroline, I want to thank you again for coming on to Lessons Learned. And I hope everyone will join me next week for another episode. Thanks again, Caroline.